Now, if you're a fan of a video game called Control or Alan Wake by Remedy Entertainment, then, well, FBC Firebreak was coming out, which was super exciting. This game is going to be set in the same universe, and honestly, it's just always a pleasure to dive back into this really strange but interesting world. But how is FBC Firebreak? And, well, I've played about 1 hour of gameplay in, so let's do some first impressions on this. What's up, everybody? My name is Marks, and they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, so instead, let's judge it by its first hour. Just to go over some housekeeping notes, FBC Firebreak is a 3-player co-op shooter game set in that Control universe. It takes place within the oldest house, which is that giant office tower building that you explore in Control, and it does happen 6 years after the main story. Currently, you can play FBC Firebreak on Windows, Xbox, and PlayStation 5, and for a little bit of a bonus, you do get it in Game Pass both for PC and Xbox, and it is bundled in PlayStation Plus. This game is also fairly new, as this did come out on June 17th, 2025, and for my first hour of gameplay, I made sure to play this on PC just using PC Game Pass, because hey, this is exciting, and it's on Game Pass, I'm gonna go in on it. And so what were some of my first impressions after that 1 hour of gameplay? Well, unfortunately, something that stuck out like a bit of a sore thumb was the bad time trying to just find a game in order to matchmake into it. You get all these menus that's pointing you in the right direction, and yet for about 20 minutes, I was still looking for a match, and every single time I was able to load into a lobby with a couple of other players, either a player was AFK, or I would get disconnected from the lobby, or even if I joined in halfway through, suddenly the lobby would just collapse. So like I said, I spent 20 minutes just trying to get into the introduction level in order to even experience the game in the first place, and was just riddled with all sorts of disconnects, and honestly that made it so much more difficult to go in and actually play the game. And for me, this raises a lot of questions, because usually you don't see that type of stuff unless there is a bit of a dead player base. And given that I did this approximately 1 week after launch, that is really not promising. Eventually, I just kind of gave up and then had to do a single player experience in order to just go into that first level to explore what the gameplay was actually like. Something that, especially for a multiplayer co-op shooter, is not something you really want to have happen. The other thing that stood out to me too was that there really wasn't much introduction as to what the heck was going on, or really any tutorial that was really set up. They just kind of threw you in the midst of it, and I had to do a lot of the interacting and understanding just on my own terms. And this did lead to a little bit of frustration because, for example, you'd just be running around and be like, okay, well, why am I on fire? And then you're dead, and then you go, okay, well, I guess I have to respawn. Let's run it back. Okay, I'm on fire again. Oh, I can shoot the shower heads to cool myself off. That would have been better if it was more in your face or explained. And there is no explanation as to what the differences are between all of the different classes. And so, you pick one loadout and you go in there, and then you're just met with some sort of tutorial. You follow the objective markers and you're doing something, and somehow it works out in the end, but you don't really understand why or how. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of made it a little bit jarring because it almost felt like you had to fail in order to understand what was going on, and so I ended up just killing a lot of time just trying to understand the game because really it didn't point me any direction, and this is just in the very first mission that the game throws at you. For example, at one point, you're supposed to shower in order to heal, which is kind of like a fun concept, but I walked into the shower and didn't understand why it wasn't working, only to find out later on that that's because the nozzle on it was kind of broken, and so I had to hit it with my wrench a couple of times in order to fix the shower, but there really was no indication otherwise. But I do admit, once I finally was able to get into the gameplay and kind of had to fail in order to understand what was going on, I was recognizing that there were a lot of fun co-op shooter elements. It reminded me almost of Payday 2 and some of these objectives that you're running around doing and solving and trying to figure things out in that front, and that part of the exploration was actually pretty fun. All of the solid gameplay stuff was interesting to me as well. I mean, when you're fixing some of the stuff up, even if you didn't know that you were supposed to fix it, going through that mini game of pressing the Q and the E button in order to not electrocute yourself was kind of cool. Also, there's a lot of fire on the ground. First of all, I didn't even know that you could put the fire out, but I was able to, by the end of it, train it together so that all of the enemies that were just kind of spawning in would run through the fire instead, making it a lot easier for me to take out a lot of these guys. And speaking of the enemies, they're going for that kind of Left 4 Dead style shooter, except this time with the fun enemies from Control that you might remember, such as guy who runs at you and swings his arms, guy who shoots, the chair people who telekinetically throw things at you, and then these grenade guys that pop in. And eventually they do throw in some of these more enemies in there that serve as almost like mini bosses. I mean, I had the third Russo brother, who's I guess not helping out with the Avengers right now, come in and try and ruin my day, but these enemies just felt like unnecessarily big bullet sponges that didn't really add that much meaningful gameplay, but maybe that's a little bit different if you're playing with your friends and kind of going through some of this stuff. And once I was actually done the in-game stuff, once again, that lack of tutorial was really in your face because I didn't understand how any of this progression system really worked, especially too with the upgrading of the weapons, because while I did bring the SMG into that one level that I played by myself, it felt pretty weak and I would have wanted to upgrade it. I just didn't really understand how. And keeping in mind that, you know, this is just off of 1 hour of gameplay and 20 minutes of that gameplay was just trying to find a lobby, I don't know if I would have had the patience really to try and stick it through to figure out how that progression system worked and whether or not there were any meaningful hooks. And I just want to say, like, to me, it is really sad that a lot of these gameplay stuff is causing issues for this game, because I really like the concept of going back into the oldest house as some of the more like grunt work type of people, where you have to go in and try and figure out and wrangle up all of these anomalies so that the Federal Bureau of Control can continue to do some of this stuff. And the tongue-in-cheekiness of it all was still ever present there, and it had that little underlying layer of like fun writing just underneath the surface of all of it. And you get glimpses of it every now and then in like the lobby or when you're running through objectives and the guy on the radio is talking to you and stuff. It's a very like fun and playful tone in this really cryptic universe. Like straight up, I just want to see what that sticky note guy is. Like, I didn't even get to the sticky note guy, and honestly, taking a look at that boss and reading through some of the stuff there seems like it would be a really interesting time to play through with your friends. It's just unfortunately there's too many barriers to overcome before you can kind of get to that part where you find that meaningful progression and you can find yourself able to fully explore and see what the game has to offer. And so all in all, like, do I recommend this game? Sadly, no. I really don't think so at this point. Don't get me wrong, it really could be fun with friends, but the matchmaking experience was terrible, which once again, that kind of is the bread and butter, the backbone of this game, if you will. So having that not feel too great to me was a really big red flag. And after that first hour, like I said, I really wanted to explore a little bit more, but then thinking about how I would have to go and enter into that matchmaking where I could go for like a little bit and then get dropped out of a match again and then inevitably would just end up in a single player lobby. Once again, the barrier to entry just felt a little bit too high. And to be fair to Remedy, they are aware of these issues and said that they were going to patch things. But this further goes down one of those trends of a lot of these newer games coming out where it feels like it's released before the game is really done. And that doesn't sit well with me. To me, it sounds like they're finishing the game after the fact. And you want the completed product to exist before you ship it for launch, not completed after you've already alienated so many players away from the player base. Sure, there are some stories about these games kind of bouncing back into the zeitgeist, but you want to start off with a strong impression, especially if you're Remedy, who's coming into this space for the first time, coming off of the backbone of games like Control and Alan Wake. This is a very unique and risky game. And it's impossible not to talk about that $50 price tag too. If you go onto Steam or you want to buy the game for $50, this is, in my opinion, really not worth it right now. Thankfully, if you are on Xbox Game Pass or PS Plus, then it is bundled in with your subscription, so you can go ahead and try it out with your friends that way. And ultimately, if you're like dead set, you want to go explore, you want to figure this out, you know that this game is going to be your jam, then I'd highly recommend you either just go through those services. And so that's my 1 hour impression of FBC Firebreak, a disappointing adventure back into the world of Control that honestly had such a cool setting, but really just did not stick the landing due to the massive hurdles that you kind of have to get over in order to fully appreciate the game. Is it going to be coming for the likes of Deep Rock Galactic? Probably not anytime soon, but I would be super curious to see what this game is going to be like in about a year's time when they're able to add a little bit more content, fix a lot of that stuff, and hopefully add a tutorial level to bring new players into the game. And so that wraps up this 1 hour gameplay review. Let me know if FBC Firebreak stuck with you or if you gave up with it halfway through, because I know critically it has not been getting good reception across the board. But thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you liked this video. That really helps out a lot. And stay tuned for the next one because there are a lot of games on Xbox Game Pass and I am determined to kind of cut through some of these more indie ones for these 1 hour gameplay reviews. So see you in the next one. Bye everyone.